Welcome to Stories Room. Enjoy listening and don't forget to subscribe. Tim barely managed to park his car near his house, realizing that his fingers were still gripping the steering wheel more tightly than usual. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 6:15 p.m. Yet another long workday was ending with the familiar, exhausting commute back to the suburbs. All the way home, he kept recalling his meeting with the company's financial director earlier that day. Once again, they discussed tight deadlines, and he had to take on 2 additional projects. Where am I going to find the time and energy? He thought with bitter irony as he slowed the car in front of his driveway. But he felt he had no choice. His salary and bonuses supported the family's stability, something he valued so highly. Opening the door and stepping over the threshold, he saw the light on in the living room. His 16-year-old daughter, Caroline, was lying on the couch, holding her phone upright and lazily scrolling through social media. The TV was off, and the house seemed unnervingly quiet, broken only by the faint sound of her fingers swiping across the screen. Tim paused briefly near the entrance, noticing the distant look in her eyes. "Hi," he said, trying to keep his voice cheerful. "How's it going?" Without lifting her gaze from the phone, she shrugged. "Fine. Mom says you got home late again, so we'll have dinner without you." Tim felt the usual pang in his chest. He had heard comments like this before, but each time it sounded as if he chose to be absent on purpose. On the other hand, he knew that Sophie, his wife, also reproached him for working too much. "It was just a busy day at the office," he began, putting his keys on the small wooden stand by the door. Caroline continued tapping silently on her screen, then looked up briefly. "I'm already used to it," she said with a certain weariness in her tone. "By the way, Mom said you're just working too hard. She says we'd manage fine even if you slowed down a bit." Tim tried to keep his composure. In truth, he wasn't hearing that for the first time. "She actually said that?" he asked. "Like I'm working too hard for no reason?" "Well, she said you're overly fixated on money and that you're stressed about it." "I don't know," Caroline replied with a shrug. He mentally noted, stressed? Indeed, sometimes he felt himself becoming irritable and depressed. But wasn't he doing all this for them, so that everything was paid for, so that Caroline would have a decent chance of getting into a good college one day? He himself had grown up in more modest circumstances and wanted to give his daughter something he'd never had. "I just want to make sure our family never lacks anything," he said, striving to keep his voice steady. "Got it," Caroline replied curtly, once again looking at her phone. "Anyway, I have to go meet a friend in an hour, so I'll go get changed." She slipped out of the living room, leaving Tim standing there with a growing sense of unease inside. These constant jabs about his work ethic kept eroding his self-confidence, chipping away at him bit by bit. He went to the kitchen and reflexively opened the fridge, checking what was inside. He saw a few containers of prepped food. Apparently dinner really had been meant only for Sophie and their daughter. Sophie was going to come home later, as she'd mentioned on the phone that afternoon. "I'll be out longer. Need to buy some stuff for the house." Tim realized she'd been doing that quite often lately, meeting old college friends or running to the store for new curtains. Around 7 in the evening, Tim hastily heated up some leftovers and ate alone. While he gulped down warm soup, he tried to calm himself. "Everything's fine. Everyone goes through phases of heavy workloads," he repeated silently. Yet somehow, he felt like a stranger in his own home. After throwing away the packaging and clearing the table, Tim went into the living room and sank into an armchair. Caroline had already left to see her friend, slamming the front door loudly before she went. Sophie wasn't answering messages. He scrolled through the news on his phone, trying to distract himself, but kept replaying her words in his head. "You stress too much. You need to relax." Sometimes he wondered if his wife was avoiding a direct conversation. The first time he had such doubts was about 6 months ago, when she started frequently mentioning, "I'll be back soon, and don't wait up," only to return at dawn. But he had pushed those unpleasant thoughts away back then. By 8:30 p.m., he couldn't take the uncertainty anymore and dialed her number. It rang for a long time, then went to voicemail. "All right, Maybe she really is busy shopping, he thought, forcing himself to ward off worrisome ideas. Finally, at 9:30, he heard the rumble of her car pulling into the driveway. He heard the door open and close quietly, then footsteps in the hallway. Sophie came in with a couple of shopping bags. "Hey," she said brightly, putting the bags down. "Sorry I'm late. Couldn't find what I needed." "What did you buy?" he asked, noticing she was avoiding eye contact. "Oh, just some towels, scented candles, little household things. There was a sale, and I couldn't pass it up," she said, setting the bags on the floor. Tim watched her unpacking the items, unable to rid himself of the feeling that she hadn't simply been gone late because of a sale. There was something slightly nervous about her gestures. "Why didn't you pick up the phone?" he asked softly, trying not to sound accusatory. She raised her eyebrows. "Sorry, it was buried deep in my purse. I heard it ring, but by the time I got it out, it had stopped, and then I forgot to call you back." She gave a quick smile that felt forced. Tim felt his insides twist. He wanted to hurl a dozen more questions at her, but he held back. After all, he had no concrete proof that she was hiding anything wrong. "All right," he merely said, watching her take the bags to the kitchen. "I'm going to finish up some reports. Early day tomorrow." "Sure, don't worry," she replied, quivered slightly. The next day, Tim worked from home on his projects. He had several investment efficiency calculations to prepare for an internal report. He settled down in his study, surrounded by folders and documents. The desk was littered with spreadsheets, the computer screen full of open files. Sophie mentioned she'd be out all day and would try to make it back by evening, without explaining in detail. Caroline said she was going to a friend's house to study for a test. Around 2 in the afternoon, Tim heard Caroline on the phone in the living room, her voice lively. Through the slightly open door, he made out fragments of her conversation. "No, Dad doesn't understand anything. He's just busy with his finances," followed by a short laugh. "Yeah, I can do whatever I want. Mom says he won't even notice." Tim tensed, hearing that. She thinks that of me? And Mom is telling her that. His heart clenched. Sure, it's normal for teenagers to criticize their parents sometimes, but he was struck by such blatant mockery. He left his study quietly and approached the living room doorway. Now he could clearly hear. "Yeah, I'm definitely heading out today too. It's so boring here. All he does is sit at his computer. And Mom, well, she said if anything happens, she'll cover for me." Tim stood up straight, a wave of anger rising to his throat. He stepped silently into the living room. Caroline noticed his silhouette and immediately ended the call. "I'll call you later," she said, pressing end and tossing the phone aside. "Hey, Dad," she said, as if nothing had happened. He tried to keep his voice level, but it came out taut. "Who were you talking to?" he asked, feeling a distinct edge in his tone. "A classmate," Caroline said dismissively, stretching as though bored. "We were just discussing weekend plans." He wanted to ask, "What do you mean? Mom will cover for you. What's that about?" but suspected it might erupt into outright hostility. Yet he still couldn't resist. "I heard a couple of your comments about how I supposedly don't notice anything. Want to explain?" Caroline's face flickered between disdain and confusion. "Dad, seriously, you don't notice. You're always in your spreadsheets, your reports, your tables. You think your schedule is the most important thing in the world. Mom's tired of that, and so am I." Tim felt those words wash over him like a cold wave. "You could have said that to my face," he answered quietly, crossing his arms. "I work a lot because I figured you wanted stability. I wanted—" Yeah, we all know what you wanted," Caroline interrupted irritably. "But I get the feeling Mom can't stand you anymore. Sorry, but that's the truth." Tim's heart sank. He swallowed, unsure how to continue. "And where did you get that impression?" he asked at last. "She told me herself that you two aren't on good terms. And if you'd just be part of the family sometimes, maybe it would have been different." Tim almost lost his composure. Her accusations, and the reference to her mother's words, burned more painfully than harsh truth. "All right," he finally said, his voice rough. "At least you're both honest about me now." "Dad," Caroline shrugged. "I don't want to fight, but I'm telling it like it is. I gotta go meet my friend. With that, she quickly moved to the entryway, slipped into her sneakers, and left. The door slammed, leaving Tim silent and shaken. That night, Tim slept poorly. His thoughts churned, swirling like leaves in the wind. Could Sophie really feel that way about me? Is she turning my daughter against me? Despair mixed with anger. The next day, he woke up early, went to the living room, and reached for the mail tray where bills and bank statements piled up. Usually he skimmed them just to confirm everything was in order. But now, he decided to check them thoroughly. Flipping through the printed credit card statements, he suddenly found unfamiliar charges. A beauty salon called Queen Lounge, a large sum. A restaurant named French Bloom, far more expensive than their rare family dinners out. A payment labeled The Gold Fell, described as consultation. The Gold Fell. Tim quickly searched online to see what that was. Turned out it was a luxury complex offering short-term upscale suites, not a consulting center. Possibly an event space? Some sort of error, he first thought, but then noticed the payments were recurring, about once a month, and quite hefty. His heart sank. Sophie had never mentioned any posh suite rentals, let alone ones so expensive. Tim carefully set the papers aside and sank onto the couch, feeling the ground vanish beneath his feet. Could she? He couldn't finish the thought. If she indeed had a lover, and they were using a paid suite. He couldn't believe Sophie would deceive him so blatantly. But he saw no other logical explanation. That evening, Tim waited for Sophie to come home. At last, she did. She walked in carrying a couple of grocery bags. He quietly observed as she went into the kitchen, set them down, and then he said softly, "We need to talk." She turned around. "No? Let me at least unpack these." "Yes, now," he replied, trying to keep his tone steady. "It's important." Sophie placed the bag on the table and faced him. "Okay. About what?" Tim took a deep breath. "I was checking our bank statements. Tell me what the Gold Fell is." She flinched, her gaze dimming noticeably. She seemed unprepared for him to ask so directly. "The Gold Fell?" she echoed, trying to collect herself. "That's a place a friend recommended. They supposedly have an interior designer, and we were discussing." Tim narrowed his eyes. "Sophie, it's a luxury short-stay suite complex. From the statements, you're making regular payments there. Could you please explain?" "Well, that's not exactly," she fumbled, her voice unsteady. He stared at her, feeling a chill in his bones. A tremor went down his spine. This was the moment when his old life began to collapse. "Are you going to tell me honestly?" he finally asked. "I'm tired of half-truths." "Tim," Sophie exhaled, tears springing to her eyes. "Let's not do this now, okay? I'm exhausted, and you're on edge. Let's postpone this." She grabbed the bags and slipped out before he could respond, leaving him alone. He remained in the kitchen, fist clenched. She clearly didn't want to have this conversation now. After that tense exchange, Tim paid closer attention to Sophie's every movement and word. He noticed she tensed whenever her phone buzzed with new messages, and sometimes she would hurriedly turn away so he couldn't see her screen. He saw how she now carefully deleted conversations whenever she left her phone on the table. But even the most cautious people slip up sometimes, he told himself. He made a habit of regularly checking their shared bank accounts, scanning statements more often than once a month. He saw repeated charges to pricey boutiques and restaurants, places they'd never dined together. One night, when Sophie was already asleep, he did something he had once considered unthinkable. He took her phone and looked at her messages. He knew he was invading her privacy, but an anxious certainty told him it was the only way to find the truth. The phone lay on the bedside table, and apparently she hadn't deleted everything yet. Tim opened her messenger and saw recent exchanges with someone named Ethan. His heart began to pound. "Miss you already. Hope to see you tomorrow. I told him I'd be out with my girlfriends. He'll believe it. I'll tell him soon. We just have to find the right moment." Tim scrolled upward, feeling everything inside him twist. There were photos, too. Sophie in the arms of a tall man, clearly not Tim, with short dark hair and a smug smile. In the background, Tim could see a panoramic window, likely the Gold Fell Suites. He forwarded everything to his own email, screenshots, photos. Returning the phone to its place, he sat on the edge of the bed, forcing himself to breathe. He felt no tears, no dramatic outburst, just a cold rage and profound disappointment, as though everything he had invested in had disintegrated. Conflict with his daughter. The next morning, Sophie left early, as usual, offering no detail about her plans. Tim, feeling crushed, sat in the kitchen nursing a cup of coffee. Soon Caroline came in, probably awakened by his movements in the hallway. "You're up early," she said, yawning. "Something happened?" He looked at his daughter, recalling her mocking tone on the phone. Yet she was still his daughter. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Caroline, can we talk?" She rolled her eyes, sighing. "Just make it quick. I'm going to a friend's place soon." Tim took a sip of coffee, deciding to be direct. "You know, your mother is seeing another man. And it looks like it's been going on for a while. I found proof, messages, photos, these expensive consultations at that sweet complex." Caroline instantly tensed and stopped yawning, turning her gaze from half asleep to fully alert. Tim had a sinking feeling she wasn't surprised. He felt even more pain. "So you knew," he said softly. She began, then hesitated. "Well, she never gave me all the details, but she hinted you two don't get along. She asked me not to tell you about some of her outings." Tim clenched his fist under the table, but kept his voice even. "And you agreed?" Caroline shrugged, looking away. "Dad, she's my mom. And you were always busy anyway. She said it was temporary. That her thing with Ethan wasn't serious." "Not serious?" Tim struggled not to shout. "She's using our family finances, lying to me, going out at night. And you've been lying to my face all this time about going to your friends to study?" "We did study, partly," Caroline snapped back. "I didn't want to get involved, but everything got so messed up. Mom kept saying how you're boring, how—" She stopped, seeming to realize she'd said too much. Tim shut his eyes, feeling despair welling up inside. He looked at her and realized it wasn't just his wife who had betrayed his trust. His daughter, too, had taken part. "Caroline," he said, trying to keep calm, "you and I are family. I never wanted you to feel deprived of anything. Now both of you have been laughing behind my back." She bit her lip, flinging aside the towel in her hands. "I never thought it would go this far, but Mom said she was tired of your lifestyle. You only ever talk about work and money. She needed more fun, and Ethan gave that to her." Tim felt something tear inside. He took a deep breath, stood up from the table, and looked away. "All right," he said quietly. "Go meet your friend if you want. I can't talk anymore right now." He didn't even hear her leave, but the next moment he realized he was alone in the kitchen. His coffee was growing cold in the mug, while he felt numb inside. Realizing he couldn't drag this on, Tim compiled all the screenshots and photos into a folder on his computer, encrypted them, and made a backup on a flash drive. He wrote down the phone number of a lawyer. A colleague had given him the contact for a good family law attorney, just in case. The next day, Tim scheduled an appointment at the lawyer's office. It was a small but comfortable room with heavy brown curtains and a solid wooden desk. The lawyer, a fit man in his mid-40s, introduced himself as Artyom Orlov. "Have a seat," the lawyer said, motioning to a leather chair. "Tell me what brings you here." Tim placed the folder on the desk. "My wife, she's seeing another man. I think it's been going on for at least a year. I gathered some evidence, bank statements, texts, photos. I want to—" His voice broke. "I want a divorce." Artyom nodded sympathetically. "I understand. It's always tough. Let's go step by step. What about property, vehicles, joint accounts, any children? These are all things to be divided. What's your plan?" Tim pressed his lips together, trying to hide the bitterness rising in him. "I don't want drama." But she obviously wasn't planning to confess. "I just want to make sure she doesn't leave me with nothing. I suspect she might have been spending family money on her affair, not just renting apartments but also buying expensive stuff for this Ethan." The lawyer opened his laptop and began typing notes. "Okay, so it's important to prove that these expenses aren't for the family's benefit. You're lucky you already have documents. How about your mortgage or loans?" Tim explained everything in detail, having to recount painful facts anew, which stretched his nerves thin. Yet the lawyer's calm, professional demeanor gave him confidence. "What about your daughter?" Artyom asked gently. "How will she react?" Tim sighed. "She'll side with her mother." She already has. But I won't waste energy fighting that. I just don't want to be paying for them and her lover. I see, the lawyer nodded. In that case, here's our approach. We file a claim, prepare the division of property, submit for divorce, and require your wife to account for these strange expenses. If we can show proof of her wrongdoing, that might help you in court, although infidelity itself doesn't always impact asset division. Tim swallowed. I understand, but I still want the truth documented. They went through the details, and by the time Tim left the office, it was nearly 7 in the evening. He felt both exhausted and oddly relieved. He was finally no longer a passive onlooker. Tim told Sophie nothing about the lawyer. He decided it was better to keep his intentions hidden until he'd gathered all the paperwork and felt ready to walk away. In the coming days, he found a modest one-bedroom apartment downtown to move into on short notice if necessary. The tension at home grew with each passing day. Sophie tried not to run into him, seemed to hide or rush out whenever he was near. Caroline looked at him with open resentment if they crossed paths. One morning, just as Tim was about to leave for work, Sophie approached him in the kitchen. Tim, she began hesitantly, looking uncertain. Could we talk? He raised an eyebrow. Sure. What's on your mind? I wanted to ask if everything's okay with us. I feel like you've been upset all the time and not talking to me. Tim gave a bitter shrug. Is everything okay? Sophie, really? Maybe you could be more honest with me. She dropped her gaze, silent, clearly hesitant to continue. If you don't want to tell the truth, Tim went on, then, well, never mind. Let's not do this now. He picked up a folder of documents, quickly left the kitchen, and headed for the front door. Sophie stood in the middle of the room, dropping the kitchen towel from her hands. On Friday evening, Tim came home earlier than usual and decided to arrange a romantic dinner. He ordered takeout from a nice restaurant, though he had no real desire for romance. But he wanted to see how Sophie would react. When she arrived, he invited her to the table, opened a bottle of wine, and poured 2 glasses. Sophie seemed slightly confused as she sat down, looking at the neatly placed plates. You decided to celebrate something? She asked cautiously. Something like that, he said, smiling faintly. Just wanted to spend the evening together. All right, she agreed, picking up her glass. Tim sat across from her, keeping silent for a few seconds, watching her. Then he said, You know, I have something for you. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and set it on the table. Sophie frowned. What's that? Printouts of bank statements, texts, photos, Tim said, feeling a stab of pain inside. I found them on your phone, from the bank. I know everything about you and Ethan. Sophie shuddered, guessing what it might contain. Why did you? Because I can't live in ignorance anymore, Sophie. I know all about your affair. Her eyes filled with tears. She glanced anxiously from the folder to Tim and back again. Tim, I didn't know how to tell you. It got out of hand. How long has it been? He asked, steel in his voice. Sophie covered her face with her hands. Almost a year. Maybe a bit more. At first, it was just infatuation. I was missing attention and warmth. You withdrew into your work. We drifted apart. I never thought it would come out like this. Right. You never thought it would come out, Tim repeated bitterly. Not that you were betraying me. She began to sob uncontrollably. Listen, it's not like that. I was going to tell you, but I was scared of your reaction. And Ethan, you said once your work got easier, we'd discuss it together. Tim clenched his fists, trying not to raise his voice. Ethan, together. God, how disgusting. He stood up from the table and took out another envelope from inside his jacket. These are the divorce papers. My lawyer prepared everything. I'm done being just a wallet for you two to laugh at behind my back. Sophie stared at him, horror-stricken. Divorce? Tim, let's try to save this marriage. Save it? He let out a harsh laugh. You conspired with our daughter, lied to my face, and now you want to try to save it after everything's come out? Too late. He threw the envelope onto the table by her wine glass. Then he gave her one last glance. Sign them or contest them. Either way, I'm leaving. She whispered, I'm sorry, and broke into sobs, but Tim had already walked away from the table toward the door. Caroline found her mother in tears and her father pulling a suitcase toward the front door. She walked into the foyer looking shocked. Dad, what's going on? Where are you going? Tim didn't even turn around as he put on his coat. I'm leaving. I've rented a place. You can stay with your mother if that's what you prefer. Wait. She grabbed his sleeve. Dad, explain. He was silent for a moment, then whipped around, and Caroline saw the anger and pain in his eyes. What is there to say? You knew everything, remember? You were making jokes about how I was blind and boring. Well, now I see it all clearly. She tried to form words but couldn't. Why'd you both do this? Tim continued, swallowing his bitterness. Instead of just saying, Dad, things are bad, Mom's unhappy, you laughed behind my back. I didn't want it to go this far, Caroline managed, her voice trembling. Mom asked me not to get involved. She said there was no future for you two anyway. Tim gave a bitter half-smile. Looks like she was right. We have no future. He carried his suitcase outside, Caroline following, arms crossed over her chest. Where are you even going? She asked, trying to hide the quiver in her voice. I've got somewhere to stay. Your mother won't sign the divorce papers, so we'll let the court decide. I've already shut down our joint accounts and moved the money. Enough. What about me? She managed. You're still my dad. Tim paused, turning around. You have no idea how much it hurts that you were part of this. If you ever change your mind, I'll be willing to talk. But not now. He saw tears well in Caroline's eyes, but she just pressed her lips together in silence. Tim closed the door behind him, walked to his car, feeling both drained and determined. At first, in his new downtown one-bedroom, Tim slept badly, tossing and turning all night. The place was sparsely furnished, just a bed, a small wardrobe, and a desk. In one sense, it felt cramped. In another, he felt free. Every evening, he methodically worked on his business tasks, trying to bury himself in routine and forget. Yet a hollow ache persisted, memories of family dinners, even if they had been infrequent, and the voice of Caroline, once a sweet little girl who had idolized him. Now that was just a sad echo. Sophie called and messaged him repeatedly. Let's discuss everything without a fight. I never wanted it to end like this. Please let me explain. Tim tried to read them, but each time felt only renewed resentment and anger. Explain what? That you lied for almost a year? Eventually, he stopped replying. His lawyer let him know the divorce proceedings were moving forward. Sophie was demanding a portion of the property, a share of the income, even the car. But since Tim could prove she had spent part of their family money on her second life, that supported his case in court. Caroline messaged him occasionally, sending mostly accusations at first. How could you abandon us? But whenever he suggested meeting to talk, she either ignored him or responded with cold sarcasm. 3 years later, Tim had rebuilt his life. He left his old office job to become a private consultant, earning far more than before. He bought a small but cozy apartment in a different, more modern area. He kept in excellent physical shape by going to the gym, jogging in the mornings. The breakup made him wary of new relationships. He rarely let people into his personal life. Yet he didn't find loneliness too oppressive. He was full of plans, and his business was growing. He had achieved things he'd never dreamed of back when he was a corporate employee. One evening, he received an invitation to a major business strategy conference. CEOs from various industries were attending. Tim decided to go. It was an excellent opportunity to forge connections. The conference took place in a luxurious hotel with sparkling chandeliers, carpets with intricate patterns, and waiters carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres. Tim picked up a glass of juice. He preferred to avoid alcohol at such events to stay focused. He was chatting with potential partners when he caught sight, out of the corner of his eye, of a familiar figure standing at the bar. A tall man with a self-satisfied smile. Tim frowned slightly. Could that be him? Moving closer, he confirmed. It was Ethan, the very man Sophie had chosen over him years ago. Ethan, dressed in an expensive suit, was loudly entertaining two companions, ostentatiously jangling the keys to a red sports car. Tim stepped a bit closer, pretending to order a drink, and overheard Ethan's confident spiel. And if the car costs more than some people earn in a lifetime, that just underscores my status, right? People see it and know I'm serious about business. His small audience nodded as Ethan went on about living it up. Tim felt a surge of disgusted curiosity. I wonder if he's still with Sophie. He casually turned toward Ethan. That car out front? Yours? Tim asked as if in passing. Ethan turned, quickly sizing Tim up, and grinned smugly. Yeah, it's mine. Beautiful, right? I love speed and comfort. Tim nodded, sipping his juice. Must be expensive to keep up. Insurance, maintenance. Not everyone can manage. Ethan smirked. Well, I earn enough to handle it. And you, what do you do? Consulting, Tim replied briefly, meeting Ethan's eyes. Sometimes I see big deals, sometimes I help companies avoid failures. I've heard your investments don't always pay off. The tone turned icy, and Ethan's brow furrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Tim allowed himself a faint smile. Just rumors. When you build your life on someone else's money and lies, sometimes it fails. Ethan hesitated, trying to figure out who he was talking to. Tim leaned in slightly, almost whispering. Tell Sophie I said hello, if she's still around. Realizing at last who was in front of him, Ethan paled. You. Tim, right? But Tim was already walking away, setting down his empty glass and heading deeper into the room. He felt no need to confront Ethan. He had long since moved on. He left the hotel a bit later, having talked to the people he needed. Standing at the entrance, he noticed the red sports car was still attracting passers-by stairs, and Ethan looked uneasy, glancing around as if unsettled by that brief encounter. Tim got into his modest yet reliable car and exhaled with unexpected relief. The past held no power over him anymore. Yes, he had once been cheated on. Yes, it had hurt, but in the end he had found a path to a more genuine life. That evening, back in his apartment, Tim brewed herbal tea, sat in his armchair, and gazed out the window. From his high floor, he could see the city lights and the steady flow of cars below. He had once dreamed of suburban tranquility and cozy family evenings, but now he understood that true peace begins within, and he had finally reached it. Of course, he sometimes thought about Caroline. By now, she was 19, nearly an adult. What was she doing? What was she interested in? They seldom communicated, and any contact was strained. But one day she messaged him, Dad, I'm sorry we acted that way. I was still a kid and didn't realize how much I hurt you. He'd replied, I'm ready to talk whenever you are. They hadn't yet met in person, but he hoped that someday they could rebuild their relationship. He sipped his tea, closed his eyes, and recalled the break that happened 3 years earlier. He used to believe his life's sole purpose was to maintain peace in the family and provide for them financially. The reality turned out differently. His wife had chosen deception, his daughter had shown little sympathy, and he had found the strength to start over and succeed. Now, looking at all he had achieved, his thriving consulting business, his strong health, and a relative inner calm, Tim realized that sometimes the loss we fear the most opens the door to a better future. He didn't regret how things had turned out. The pain had taught him to value honesty and respect himself. Setting the cup on the armrest, he rose to switch off the lights. Outside, the city shimmered as always, a symbol of his new, freer life. The past was behind him, and now he was moving forward, without fear, without self-reproach, feeling as if the storm clouds overhead had finally cleared. Before long, another event awaited him, a major opportunity with an international firm, where he would serve as lead consultant. A few years ago, he'd never have dreamed of offers like this. Now, Tim took it in stride. He knew that success required both diligence and self-awareness. Caroline messaged him occasionally to ask for advice about her studies. She still lived with her mother, and it seemed her mother's relationship with Ethan had ended long ago. Tim didn't pry. That was no longer his story. But one day, Caroline called. Dad, can I come visit you for the weekend? Her voice was quiet, almost shy. Tim felt his heart flutter. Was she finally ready? He smiled, even though she couldn't see it. Of course. Come. That short call meant more to him than any expensive gifts or apologies. Perhaps it was the first step toward real reconciliation. After hanging up, he felt a forgotten warmth inside, hope that, at least with his daughter, he could rebuild the lost connection. And a sense that life would go on, capable of offering new, brighter moments, flooded him. Tim got up from the couch and walked around the apartment, taking in its modest yet comfortable setting. Once, he had feared that post-divorce, his world would collapse. But there he was, standing firmly on the foundation of his own resolve, waiting for his daughter's visit, feeling stronger and more confident than ever. Yes, life can strike hard. But if you can stand up and move on, you earn true freedom. Freedom to be yourself, to act with integrity, and finally to love your life for what it has become, despite all the storms. That's the end of our story. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to stay up to date on new stories and share this video so others can discover these great stories too.